So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our first Impact series seminars. And I'd like to first introduce you to the journal Indoor Environment, which is our new journal, official journal of the Society, EASIAC. And the first issue was published in March last year, 2024, with your support and the editorial board support. We have published more than 100 papers so far, and which was accepted among nearly 300 submissions. So this is very good. We are looking forward to have our impact factor very soon, probably next year. As we mentioned, EASIAC, together with the journal, like to launch this webinar series and to feature the influential or popular articles that published in the journal. And the goal of this series is to share such scholar work from the journal with a multidisciplinary kind of background. So we hope the talk is a little bit different from a normal seminar talk, but more like a plenary talk in a conference. So because we face our different audience from different background. And the webinars is open for everybody to attend and beyond EASIAC members, but the recording of the talk will remain available for EASIAC members only. So you can find the website link for the impact talk. It's really my great pleasure to introduce our first impact talk author, Mr. James Repace. And Mr. Repace calls himself a secondhand smoke consultant. He is retired and used to work with the US EPA as a senior air policy analyst. And he published many papers and also a book, Enemy Number One, and Waging the War on Secondhand Smoke. And if you look at the literature, you will find his work, Advanced Workplace Smoking Bans Globally, which is very, very significant for us to learn. And in particular for me, I'm not that old to know all the histories before then. And he received the Surgeon General's medallion and awards from many associations, including American Public Health Association. He's testified as an expert in over 60 secondhand smoke legal cases. And he had research roles at the US Navy Research Laboratory. And in 1998, he received this honor as tobacco industry enemy number one. So he will talk about his work published in Indoor Air Environment, the second issue, volume 1 on secondhand smoke. James, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you, Hugo. I'm going to talk about the research that I've been doing for basically since 2006. And I just wanted to recap how I got there, which I detailed in my memoir, Enemy Number One. I started out in 1978 when I was working at the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington, D.C. And I and some colleagues at the Naval Research Laboratory and the National Security Agency became concerned about secondhand smoke in restaurants and bars, because those of us who were non-smokers and who were sensitive to smoke really were precluded from visiting these spaces. And so we tried to get a legislation passed in our local county, Prince George's County, Maryland, which at that time was a tobacco growing county. So it was an uphill struggle. And we petitioned the county council and they asked if we had any data to support our contention that secondhand smoke polluted these spaces. And so I was able to borrow a piezo balance from the manufacturer, and I kept it for 7 months. And we roamed around making measurements in about 56 different microenvironments, including restaurants and bars and dinner theaters and dives and bowling alleys and bingo games, sports stadia indoors and so forth. And we managed to get it published in the journal Science. It was a 10-page article, and it sort of electrified the scientific community at that time. There wasn't much publicity about it, but in I'm going to skip over the intermediate papers that I've done. I'm just going to talk about the 3 or 4 most important ones. And then in 1985, Dr. Lowry and I, he was still at NRL and I was at EPA at the time. We published a paper in Environment International, which predicted that there were about 5,000 Americans who died every year from secondhand smoke-induced lung cancer. And that sort of electrified the public health community, and the National Academy of Sciences and the Surgeon General both published reports in 1986, which agreed that secondhand smoke caused lung cancer. Then I initiated a program to have EPA weigh in and do a report on estimating secondhand smoke induced lung cancer from the Office of Research and Development published that report in 1992, and that essentially broke open a great deal of public interest and some smoking bans around the country. Fast forward to 2002, I was able to secure research grants from both the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the Flight Attendant Medical Research Institute, which rewarded me for my work on helping to get smoking off of aircraft. I testified in the 1989 Oberstar hearings before the U.S. House of Representatives, in which they banned smoking on U.S. aircraft up to 5-hour flights. And in 1998, they banned them on international flights as well. Anyhow, in 2002, I got these research grants, and I bought a lot of research equipment and was all set to do some measurements. And I got a request from the chief medical officer of the state of Delaware, who informed me that Delaware was going to ban smoking in November, I think, of 2003 or 2002. He asked me, and he said he would want me to do before and after measurements of the smoke levels in Delaware. So I allied with the American Lung Association of Delaware, which provided me some assistance in terms of identifying the venues that we were going to measure. And we made measurements in November when everything was full of smoke. And then again in February, the following February, when all of these venues were deemed adequately smoke-free. And what we found was that 90% of the fine particle levels in these venues, which were a casino, a pool hall, and 6 bars, 90% of the fine particle levels were due to secondhand smoke, and 95% of the carcinogen levels were due to secondhand smoke. And the levels in all of these venues were much higher than on busy commuter highways going through the state of Delaware. So that particular study sort of electrified the world. We got the Associated Press picked up the story, and we got 650 media impressions, as they described them, all over the world, and it fomented a lot of smoking bans worldwide. And I consulted for many countries, including the United States and Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, Chile, Ireland, England, Portugal, Norway, and so forth. And so I've been around the block. Now, in 2006, I began to get some requests for measuring secondhand smoke can you see my second slide?
Yes, I can see.
Okay, here we go. We can measuring secondhand smoke in multi-unit housing where non-smokers were complaining of infiltration. And I allied with Professor Catherine Hammond at the University of California, Berkeley, who in 1977, with Professor Brian Lederer at Yale, developed a passive nicotine monitor, which was the standard for measuring nicotine in these kinds of spaces. It could be used in an active mode or a passive mode. And so, as you can see, 46% of the multi-unit housing residents in the US with smoke-free home rules, or 29 million persons, experience secondhand smoke infiltration in their apartments. And many of them found this really repulsive. Federal health authorities have now warned that secondhand smoke exposure in multi-unit housing is detrimental to the health of children and non-smoking adults. But unfortunately, none of the 50 US states ban smoking in privately owned multi-unit housing, and less than 10% of the 91,000 US municipalities do. And the few that do, about 20 or 25 cities and towns in the Bay Area of California near San Francisco do ban smoking in multi-unit houses that are privately owned. Now, the Department of Housing and Urban Development does ban smoking in HUD subsidized housing, but unfortunately, it is very poorly enforced because I had several clients who live in these places and they say the enforcement is essentially zilch. Anyhow, can you see my third slide?
Not yet.
Okay, here we go.
Yes,
So,
got it.
yeah, you can see in 2006 already, the California Energy Commission noted that there is leakage between individual apartments, both to and from the outdoors and from one apartment to another. And there is an interaction between whole building leakage and apartment to apartment leakage. So you can, one suite can affect another even by opening a window. And if you run exhaust fans, that can certainly cause you to have negative pressure in your unit and suck air from other units. And that illustrates it right here. If the smoker's unit is under neutral pressure, you can see that smoke can get out. If it's under negative pressure, air goes into it and it contains the smoke in the unit. But if it's under positive pressure, with respect to non-smokers units, then the smoke in that unit will travel. And the exposure factors handbook that EPA developed shows that as much as 10 to 90% of the hang on a second. I got to get my other, 10 to 90% percentile for US homes in all regions ranges from about 2.2 air changes per hour to about 1.3 air changes per hour, with a geometric mean of about a half an air change an hour. And importantly, the air exchange rates are log normally distributed. So the point here is that buildings are porous. So cigarette smoke travels from unit to unit, as I mentioned, through holes in the walls, the ceilings, the floors, ventilation systems, electrical outlets, plumbing openings, and cracks around doors into corridors. And by the way, this also occurs in commercial dwellings as well, commercial businesses. And I've had several clients who were driven out of business because they were located next door to a cigar bar. Now, a very important study was done by Bohack and Hewitt in Minnesota at the Center for Energy and Environment, and they published this paper. Anyhow, they studied smoke infiltration and air infiltration in 8-plex, 4-story buildings, 12-plex, 138 unit buildings, and 11-story buildings. And I have plotted their data on a log probability plot. And this shows the percent of air that moves between units. And this is basically in cubic meters per hour. You can see the percent of air infiltrating from other units. The geometric mean, before they did some intervention, tried to seal the spaces professionally, was a little under 5%. And they managed to get it down to a little under 4%, or about a 25% reduction by sealing and ventilation measures. So it was fairly ineffective. Importantly, they found that 8% of the units had between 25% and 70% of their air infiltrating from neighboring apartments. And that's a big problem if you have a neighboring apartment to yours that is full of secondhand smoke, and the levels can get very, very high. Here was a study done by Dr. Neil Kleppeis. I think he's at University of California, San Diego, and he looked at the level of smoke in non-smoking areas in a 4-story building in California, in San Jose. And you can see he measured in real time the levels in the lobby and the parking garage, and they were very low. Down here, maybe less than 10 micrograms per cubic meter for PM 2.5. Then in the hallway outside the third floor apartment, you can see they were running 35, 40 micrograms per cubic meter. And outside the, hang on a second, I can't read this. Yeah. Inside the bedroom on the 4th floor unit, you can see the levels were in the non-smoking area, we're running peak levels hitting 60 micrograms per cubic meter. And these are the real-time fluctuations in smoke on a 3-day period from Sunday to Tuesday. And you can see that the concentrations in the non-smokers unit increased from 10 microgram per cubic meter to more than 60. It doesn't take long for smoke to travel between a smoking unit and a non-smoking unit. And this was a study done, hang on, by Brian King, who was at that time at the CDC in Atlanta. And then he measured the lag time between smoking in these 2 neighboring apartments in Unit 9 into Unit 24, and it took 2 minutes for this first cigarette and 3 minutes for the second cigarette. So it really can move very rapidly between units. So my study now, I've been collecting data, as I mentioned, since 2006 up until 2023. And I was able to collect data on 104 multi-unit apartments in 71 municipalities in 19 US states and the District of Columbia, plus 2 Canadian provinces. I was able to confirm smoke infiltration using passive nicotine monitoring for residents of 103 non-smoking apartments using the Hammond monitors. And another 5 subjects, we used marijuana smoke wipe tests and confirmed that they were having smoke infiltration. And I managed to estimate what the typical levels of secondhand smoke would be in smokers' units using mathematical modeling. Now, here we go. Now, this shows us the units that were measured in 21 different, let me get rid of this thing, 21 regions in 71 locales in 19 US states, from California to Washington, D.C., plus Alberta and Quebec and Canada. And you can see they're all over North America. So this is a very widespread problem. And I would note that these are people who are willing to spend $500 for a report and $100 for the lab to do the nicotine monitoring, plus postage. So it was between $600 and $700. So these were people who were relatively well off. I did some pro bono work for people who were living in subsidized housing and couldn't afford the report. And you can see that it was pretty widespread. One in particular was in Honolulu. Unfortunately, the people who were exposed were unable to get the management to give them any relief. And what do the non-smokers complain of when they secondhand smoke infiltrated? Eye, nose, and throat irritation, headache, dizziness, and nausea, difficulty in breathing, tachycardia, asthmatic attacks, and malodors. Many of them reported that they sought medical care. Some were hospitalized, and some regarded their apartments as uninhabitable and had to move out. About 12% resorted to litigation, which had mixed results. Some were successful in getting the smokers to smoke outside, and others lost their cases. The litigation is often very difficult and expensive. I had one client in Washington, D.C., who sold their condominium at a loss. I was with townhouse, which was located next to other townhouses on either side. And the neighboring townhouse was rented out to 4 marijuana smokers, and they were simply gassed out. And they sold their house at an $80,000 loss, and then went into court, and they lost the case. So it was unfortunate. The nicotine levels in the subjects' apartments ranged from 0.001 to 6.6, so 3 orders of magnitude, and the geometric mean was about 0.03 micrograms per cubic meter. Now, I modeled the PM 2.5 levels for a typical smoker's apartment and estimated air pollution levels in the smoker's unit, people who smoke 2 cigarettes per hour over a 16-hour smoking day, would range from very unhealthy to hazardous levels of the U.S. Air Quality Index. And the wipe test that we used measured for tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana smoke. And those ranged from 1.25 microgram per cubic meter to nearly 7 micrograms per cubic meter. And the reported health effects were similar to those with tobacco complaints. Now, there have been a number of studies over the years. This was done by Weber and Grandjean over in Switzerland, used controlled chamber studies using 30 to 40 subjects, and they found that the eye, nose, and throat irritation and eye blink rate increased with increasing secondhand smoke concentration. The sensory irritation and eye blink rate increase with increasing exposure duration, and that people who suffered from hay fever reported significantly more secondhand smoke eye irritation than those without such allergy. Now, there were two important medical studies, one done by Spear and the other done by Saville quite a while ago. And Spear found that an impressively large number of allergic and non-allergic smokers complained of symptoms from secondhand smoke. And Saville reported for people who reported on clinical hypersensitive reactions to tobacco smoke, who had strong allergic backgrounds, developed immediate respiratory discomfort after being exposed to cigarette smoke. And Saville concluded that cigarette smoke may be responsible for respiratory distress in non-smoking sensitized individuals. And that would explain some of the data that I have for reports, which I will get to in a little while. These were two places that this one was a jewelry store operated by a non-smoker in Norfolk, Virginia, who was gassed out by the bar above him, and he went out of business. This one was a spa, which was located next to a cigar bar, and he was gassed out and had to close down as well. These others are just a sample of the 104 residences that people have complained about secondhand smoke in New Jersey, Washington, D.C., Virginia, Manhattan, New York, Pasadena, California. This is the first case I ever did. And this one was in Greenbelt, Maryland, where I used to live. San Diego, Colorado Springs, in Maryland here, Colorado, Manhattan, Washington, D.C. You can see the variety of these buildings. And this was subsidized housing in Massachusetts. And this is the age range of the complaint units. And you can see there's no particular correlation with age. For buildings that were constructed in the last 20 years, or buildings that were constructed over 120 years ago, there were all complaints. And most of the buildings were constructed between 20 and 60 years ago. This is the Hammond passive nicotine monitor. Its construction, it comes with a plastic cassette, support pad, sodium bisulfate treated filter, which reacts with the nicotine that comes in through the windscreen. And it comes all assembled with a alligator clip so you can hang it on a lamp or some other place. And this is what it looks like assembled. If you want to do an active monitoring, you can pull this little red pin off and hook it up to a sampling pump. And this was the unit that I supplied to my clients who deployed it for 30 days. And the limit of detection for 30 days is 0.005 micrograms per cubic meter. If you leave it in longer, it will collect, it will read at lower levels of exposure. Now you can see these were all complaint places and buildings. And this is the one down here at 0.001, and this one was up 6.6 micrograms per cubic meter. And the difference here, I believe, is due to these people down in here were really hypersensitive to tobacco smoke and complained at extremely low levels of exposure. You can see I've made an estimate of the fine particle levels based on some experiments that I did with the Stanford Civil and Environmental Engineering Group, where we measured for 3 years, we measured smoke in multi-unit housing and did a bunch of experiments in the Pacific Inn to quantify this. And this here plots the estimated daily average secondhand smoke particulate concentration in these units. And you can see up here, this would be over 1,000 micrograms per cubic meter, which is really super smoky. That's like being in the smoker's apartment. And this one here would be less than 0.2 micrograms per cubic meter. So there was a big range. And you can see these data are log normally distributed. And the percentile here is about is a little bit above the Juncker irritation median. This was an experiment done by Juncker et al. In Switzerland, where they let me just fast forward here. Here we go. This is an experiment done by Juncker et al., where they had 24 women who were young and healthy between the ages of 18 and 34 years old, and they put them in an exposure chamber and exposed them to secondhand smoke. And they examined what are the irritation and odor thresholds for secondhand smoke. And what they found was that the median eye, nose, and throat irritation threshold was about 4.5 micrograms per cubic meter, and the malodor threshold was about 1 microgram per cubic meter. So you can see that the great number of these was, about 90% of them were above those medians. The measurements that I've made are very consistent with studies by Bohack and Kryev and King and so forth, where they had short-term measurements, typically 1 week averages or 3-day averages, and they were very similar to what I found. Now, what's important here is that the nicotine is a marker, as I mentioned, for much larger levels of secondhand smoke particulate pollution, and in a smoker's unit, typically you would find about a 10-to-1 ratio for fine particles to nicotine, and when it penetrates through the walls, we did an experiment in the Pacific Inn with the Stanford group, and we found typical levels. Typical levels of about 250 to 1 penetrating between units. And other workers have found similar large ratios, 100 to 1. And that was, so now the model levels of secondhand smoke in a typical smoker's apartment range, as I mentioned, from very unhealthy to hazardous, depending on how much the smoker smoked. And I use this model here. I won't go into details. You can refer to the paper where it's discussed in detail, particularly in the supplemental thing. But I will mention that the coefficient relies on a 2 cigarette per smoker hour and 14 milligrams per cigarette. This is the smoker density, that is the number of smokers who smoke at that rate per unit volume, and this is the air exchange rate of the unit. And if you assume a median air exchange rate of about a half an air change an hour, and a typical smoking unit volume of 266 cubic meters, you can calculate a level of 177 micrograms per cubic meter. 2 smokers would boost the level up to 355 micrograms per cubic meter, and a chain smoker would boost it up to 531 micrograms per cubic meter. So that's very unhealthy to hazardous, according to the US EPA Air Quality Index. This is the Air Quality Index as it was published in September 2018. There was a new one published in 2024, and it reduced this level here to 9 microgram per cubic meter. So, but you can see that in the unhealthy to very unhealthy to hazardous range, which is where smokers' units are, These are very hazardous levels of tobacco smoke, and this is for PM 2.5 in the outdoor air, but it applies also to the indoor air. And ASHRAE, the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineer, uses these standards to judge the quality of the indoor air. Now, let's take a look at the symptoms that the clients reported. This is the rank order of symptoms. You can see that the most common symptom that was reported was asthma, difficulty in breathing, malodor or nuisance, coughing, eye irritation, headache, throat irritation, consulted a physician or were hospitalized, experienced nausea or vomiting, dizziness, fatigue and weakness, nasal irritation, tachycardia, choking, and allergy aggravation. And you can see how these were distributed. And this is the rank order of 421 complaints made by the 162 subjects in the 104 units with secondhand smoke infiltration. And you can see about 20% of the total complaints were aggravation of asthma and causing difficulty in breathing. Now, this is a study done by my colleague Wayne Ott at Stanford, where he hired a marijuana smoker to smoke marijuana joints or cigarettes, bongs, pipes, vapes, and he compared them to a Marlboro cigarette. And every way of smoking this, the marijuana cigarettes produced more fine particle levels than the cigarette did. And you can see this is what it looked like in his living room. The peak levels were running maybe 275 microgram per cubic meter, and the peak levels from the tobacco cigarettes were running maybe 45 micrograms per cubic meter. So you can see marijuana smoke, marijuana smoking units produce a tremendous amount of smoke, and that's going to be a very big problem that's emerging in the United States now, as many states have legalized marijuana for sale for recreational use. And you can see that all these different types of homes, this is for marijuana smokers, duplexes, row houses, high-rise buildings, single-family home from a neighboring home, and they all experienced rather severe complaints. And this is a question then for public and private policymakers. Should non-smokers have to resort to litigation to rid their apartments of secondhand smoke? I conclude then that secondhand smoke infiltration from smokers' apartments and non-smoking units in multi-unit housing can provoke major morbidity for non-smoking residents, that sealing of cracks or air cleaning or increased ventilation proved futile. This was proved by Bohack and Hewitt in the Minnesota study, and also many of my clients have reported doing these things and found that they really didn't work. So bottom line is that building owners and managers need to be educated about protecting non-smoking residents' health from secondhand smoke infiltration. And the basic conclusion is that smoking of tobacco and marijuana in multi-unit housing should be banned. And that concludes my talk.
Thank you, James, for really exciting and a very interesting talk and discussing this issue of second smoke infiltration in multi-unit apartment. And in this part of the world, we live in multi-units, high-rise buildings all the time. So I started to worry a little bit. But let's take a look. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, please type in the chat box. I'd like to take on the first question raised by Mark Syndicus. And James, his question is, do you think other threats, such as PM 2.5 or volatile organic compounds, and should also be, might also be more strictly measured and enforced in future because they can also be a travel between units. And but it's maybe there may be too much variety in these factors uh, compared to secondhand smoke. James, you see his question? It's in the chat box.
Let me see. Yeah. Uh,
Earlier on
Let me look at
from Mark.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now I see them. Yeah. Um, do you think that other indoor threats such as PM time two or VOCs might be more strictly measured and enforced in the future? Is there too much variety in these factors? No, I don't think so. I think, particularly if you could do controlled experiments, we did some of these in the Stanford group, but we, in general, we were not able to get into the smokers unit to make simultaneous measurements. The only time we were able to do that was in controlled experiments we did in a Pacific Inn motel, where we measured smoke in the smoking unit and in the non-smoking unit. But to do this in practice would require that we were able to get into the smokers unit at the same time, and generally you can't get permission to do that. So that's a problem. Uh, the In terms of just measuring it in the non-smoking unit, if you look at VOCs, VOCs can be generated by a whole variety of different things, and so can PM 2.5. That's why uh, I measured the nicotine, which is only due to tobacco smoke, or tetrahydrocannabinol, which is only due to pot smoking. Uh, since you can't do simultaneous measurements generally in complaint units, this is a big problem. VOCs can be emitted by a whole variety of products, and including cooking and cleaning agents and everything. So measuring VOCs is problematic. So I've never tried to do that. You can do it under controlled experiments, and I think they should be done. I think some of these were done by Phil DeCunto in the Stanford study that we did, and he's published three very nice papers on that, in which I am a co-author, and so is Wayne Ott. Anyhow, that I think answers that question. And
Thank you.
and then there was a question by Andy Pursley. Any thoughts on vaping? Uh, yeah, I think vaping is a big problem. I actually have done a lot of uh, cases involving secondhand smoke injury and child custody cases. I have one right now, which has been going on for 5 years, where uh, the non-custodial father is started out cigarette smoking, then he's quit that and he's now vaping, and the child still shows significant traces of cotinine in her urine. So it is a big problem. There has not been a lot of research on it, uh, as far as I know. Maybe Wayne Ott can uh, enlighten us on that issue. And does vaping release the same amount of nicotine indoors? I think it probably depends on the type of vaping cigarette that you have. Um, some of them might have higher levels of nicotine. I frankly don't know the answer to that. And can you please comment on, this is from Jeffrey Siegel, on outdoor smoking in multi-family buildings in designated smoking areas or on balconies? Um, I've had clients who have complained about smoking on other units' balconies, that it's been invading their premises. which can be a big problem. I also have one client in California who complained about smoking in a single family house on another lot next door. And they said there were so many smokers there that the levels invaded their property. And I think this particular case was marijuana smoking. So it is a problem. Outdoor smoking can be a big problem as well, but not as big as indoor smoking. I don't see any other questions here.
James, I have a small question about, today we have different indoor environmental problems and people do their work and investigation. And very normally it's very difficult for policymakers to take a notice. And you have been rather successful, at least for the smoking ban, second smoking ban in aircraft and so on. And now you are working on third-hand smoke, maybe second-hand smoke in
Yeah.
multi-units. So what
Yes.
are your advice to
Third
young
hand,
people today?
yeah, the third hand smoke, I think Georg Matt at the university, no, what is he, at San Diego State University. He does third hand smoke and very effectively, I might add. As far as what was the other question you had?
Yeah, what are your advice to young
Ah,
people today, to communicate to policy workers, policy makers and communicate their
yeah.
research findings?
I think the most effective way of doing that is to go to the press. If you can interest a newspaper uh, uh, in covering the issue, or radio stations or television stations. In the past, I have found that my work has been picked up very effectively by the newspapers, by television, by radio, and so forth. At the time, it was quite shocking, I think, to discover that what people just sort of took for granted, that smoking was polluting all these buildings and they had to put up with it, and they didn't know how bad it was for them. And that attracted a lot of interest. And so if we do these studies and try to interest the press, I think that can affect the policymakers, because then it generates complaints by the public to the policymakers, who then feel obligated to do something about it.
So Professor Jeff Siegel has his second question on chat.
Is the failure of non-band such as ventilation, compartmentalization, due to the implementation in the studied buildings, or could they work? There are some jurisdictions, such as Ontario, where smoking cannabis bans in multi-building family buildings are very hard to implement in some cases. The best practices, unfortunately, don't seem to work very well. As I mentioned, the study by Bohack and Hewitt, where they tried really hard to seal and to use ventilation uh, to eliminate secondhand smoke infiltration. Uh, they couldn't do it very well. They just managed to get a 25% reduction. And most people don't have access to engineering studies like that, or engineers who can intervene. And so they tried it on their own. Many of them used air cleaners. Some had multiple air cleaners. Some of my clients had 5 or 6 air cleaners that might cost $500 or $1,000 a piece, and deployed them and still had complaints that they weren't working. So the level of smoke can really overwhelm these air cleaning. So I don't see that as a control measure. I think the control measure that works is when the building management enforces no smoking rules. In rental buildings, you can enforce that by eviction. One of my sons lives in a condominium in Orlando, Florida, right now, which has a smoking ban against marijuana uh, in its lease agreements, and they are in the process of evicting a marijuana smoker because he refuses to stop smoking, and it is affecting his neighbors. So that can work pretty well. Now, in buildings that are condominiums or not that are rentals, that works pretty well. In buildings that are condominiums, it's much harder if you don't have a preliminary ban, and then you either have to resort to litigation or to try to convince your homeowners association to change the rules to fine the smokers if they're affecting other units. You really can't contain tobacco smoke or marijuana smoke in an apartment. It's just not possible.
So, James, I take the opportunity to ask a last question. Um, this is about your study. I mean, your sample, 104 apartments, 162 subjects. They are self-selected. I mean, they report to you about their problem. So how, I mean, there must be selection bias here. So what would be your recommendation if somebody can continue the study and so that you can have a representative represent a broader population of such multi-unit housing in the country?
Right. There is the problem of selection bias. These are people who could well afford to pay for a report, and many of them can afford to litigate as well. About 12% of those people did that, and that can be very, very expensive. Uh, so, uh, aside from that, uh, if you wanted to do a study, maybe some governmental unit could go in. It has happened in low income houses where places like Boston and New York, they have gone into subsidized apartments and made measurements. And I think you can do that. In other places, I think it would be difficult, but it would really take to do a random controlled study uh, to have some governmental unit do that, either on the city, state, or federal level. Federal level these days, I don't think that's going to happen. Uh, for example, the Trump administration has simply abolished the Office of Research and Development at the EPA. They're just putting them out of business. And it isn't the only federal agency that's happening to, but in this particular case, it's a disaster.
Thank you, James, for your talk and answering all the questions. And ladies and gentlemen, it's also very good to see some of you new and old friends, and look forward to seeing you in the next Impact Talk series. Thank you very much, and good
Thank
night,
you.
good morning, and good afternoon.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye bye.